spiritual work, especially if it involves inner imaging, is more effective when the Earth's magnetic field is quiet. I once played around with a set of crystal tools where you simply lie down and you hold the tools in your hands and you let their energy do what it will do. I once found an enormous flood of visions coming. This was the first time I'd used them in quite some time. And I checked the geomagnetic indices, and what I found was the field was flat. And when I spoke to Dr. Persinger about this, he said, "Oh yes, that's what you should expect." And ever since then I have expected it, and ever since then it hasn't been as powerful. So the other thing worth mentioning is that the feeling of a sensed presence that I described last week, where you think there's someone, you feel that there's someone behind you, but when you turn to look, but no one is there, that's more likely when the measures are higher. Out-of-body experiences are much more likely during times of enhanced geomagnetic activity, louder geomagnetic activity, stronger fields. Psychic perceptions are quite different. They're more likely during quiet times, as I just mentioned. And the reason for this is quite interesting, and that's because things like out-of-body experiences and sensing a presence involve both sides of the brain, whereas psychic perception seems to involve only one side of the brain, the right side. So not only are we having different responses to the Earth's magnetic field and its activity, there's actually different brain parts working when you're having what's classically called a spiritual or religious experience than there are working when you're having a psychic experience. And that is, well, good to know, especially if you're in my line of work. The other thing worth mentioning is that those times of crisis-related psychic perception, the mother in one place knowing when the daughter in another is in trouble, they're more likely when it's quiet. The brain is more responsive to psychic input when a quiet period comes just after a noisy period. So first, the Earth's magnetic field is at its peak. There's lots of turbulence going on. It might even be a geomagnetic storm. A few hours later, things settle down and things are very quiet. Right then is a launch window for more effective psychic work. And the interesting thing about it is that it suggests that the brain is accommodating, that there's some mechanism in our brains that changes our consciousness following the Earth's magnetic field, and that from time to time when these extra bits of information, these extra psychic perceptions are more available, our brain is overcompensating. Not for geomagnetic noise, which you might think would interfere with the brain's functioning, but rather for geomagnetic quiet. So that our brains, which are normally on, everywhere through the brain, unless those areas are told to be turned off, everything is active unless it's inhibited, leave us more sensitive to quiet times in the Earth's magnetic field. And the other thing about our brains is that they're filled with magnetite. Our brains are actually responding to the Earth's magnetic field because we are wired up to do so with a heavy load of actual magnetite crystals. There are 5 million of them per gram in the center of the brain, the normal brain tissues. 5 million per gram. And there are 1,400 grams in your average human brain. Interestingly, the outer area of the brain, the meninges, the membrane that surrounds it, has 100 million of these magnetite crystals per gram. And the shape of these magnetic crystals doesn't occur in nature. It's only found in biological tissue. Now, since this was discovered, it was published in December of 1992 under the somewhat heady title of Biomagnetite Mineralization in the Human Brain, published by Joseph Kirschvink and a group of researchers that he worked with. I actually called him on the phone because I was very interested in the evolution of this system. And he did tell me, which hadn't been published, that other primate brains have been found to have the same minerals in them. Chimpanzees, gibbons, lab I don't know what the primates were, but he confirmed that we are not the only species that has this. And not only are the crystals formed in the brain tissue, and it's hard to explain how that unique shape would appear if they weren't formed there, they're also organized. And they tend to occur in nice, neat chains. And this maximizes a thing called the magnetic moment, which is kind of a magnetic analog to momentum. It allows them to actually handle more force, and that's what magnetic fields are. They're a force, not an energy. It allows them to handle more magnetic force, which perhaps is why the brain seems to compensate, not for geomagnetic noise or storms, but for quiet, is because they are actually arranged in such a way as to be able to more readily handle huge amounts of information from the Earth's magnetic field, large changes, big magnetic fields, and when things suddenly drop and become quiet, these long chains of magnetite crystals must needs change their function as well, and they don't seem to do it on a dime. It seems to take several hours for this to happen. And because of this kind of correlation, there are some other effects that have been reported. And this came long before the octopus studies, maybe 10, 15 years in some cases. One thing that Dr. Persinger did was he took a large number of PSI experiments, and he studied all of them and saw how pronounced the effects were, just how radical a psychic phenomena had been for the researchers who did this study and that study involving such things as remote viewing, extrasensory perception with the little cards, well, you name it, the whole range. And what he did was he took the size of the effect in those studies, year by year, and compared them to the overall yearly activity for the Earth's magnetic fields. And he found that the Earth's magnetic field was quieter during the years in which the most effective studies were done. And so, of course, this result cuts across the entire field of what's come to be called PSI research, because it says not only experiments that seemed to be failures because the effect size was so small, actually were successes because these small effects were gotten in the face of very active geomagnetic years. In another one of the studies, and I think this is perhaps the most fascinating one of all, Dr. Persinger found a number of cases in Fate magazine. Now, Fate magazine does not have a high reputation among many scientists, but one thing they have done over their many years of publication is get people who report their psychic experiences for publication in their magazine to say when they made the psychic prediction and when the event they predicted actually took place. Now, he didn't have this information down to the hour, but he did have it to the day. And what he found was that the levels for the Earth's magnetic field, whether high or low, were the same on the day the psychic made the prediction and the day they predicted actually took place. So there's a definite pairing of prediction and event through the Earth's magnetic field. And the other one I already mentioned is that out-of-body experiences are more likely during times of geomagnetic storm. And one of the things that he said when he published that paper was that it was very likely that it wasn't the actual field strength that was the active agent. It wasn't just how strong or how weak the field is. Rather, during times of geomagnetic storm, or when it's simply unsettled, or when it's very quiet, there's information, either present or absent, that plays a role in this. It's not how strong the field is, but rather what kind of information is embedded in it. And the information will be different during a geomagnetic storm than it is during geomagnetic quiet. The other thing he had to say in that publication, which I think I've already quoted in these series a couple of times, is that one hypothesis to explore why this is the case is that it's possible that some part of our consciousness is actually interacting with, taking information from, literally connected, like gears are connected to the Earth's magnetic field. If the geomagnetic field shut off tomorrow, it wouldn't just be that there was less magnetism around, perhaps a change in electrical storms, each and every individual on the planet might feel a shift in their consciousness. And this is worth considering when you think about how many psychics are predicting pole shifts and how many geologists have told us that there are such things as a shifting of north and south for the Earth's magnetic field. And the one brain part, and there's a nice, very engaging image of the Earth's magnetic field, it does tend to underscore how heavily small changes in the Earth's magnetic field can rely on big changes in the solar winds. They're all part of one large system. And I'm fond of saying that because all of our brains are embedded in the Earth's magnetic field, we may not all be one, but we are all connected. So the single brain part that is most implicated in all of this is a brain structure called the hippocampus. And not just both of them, but specifically the one on the right side, where language centers are not. And so far, no one has been able to define exactly what's happening in the right hemisphere of the brain, in the mirror image spots where language happens on the left. But the crucial point is that psychic information is nonverbal information. The hippocampus is a very cognitive structure. It has been called the contextualization engine in the brain. It takes things, finds context for them, makes connections between things. And if it has no context for something, it will literally create one. It's heavily involved in spatial memory, spatial perception. It's instrumental in maintaining our internal maps, how you get from your bedroom to your front door and down to the corner store and back without having to actually think the route through is something that the hippocampus is very much involved in. It creates memories, turns our present moment experience and takes our present moment experience and turns them into memories that we can retrieve later on. It also is very much involved in coming up with the content of our dreams. It picks, so to speak, along, never by itself, always in connection with other structures, but it will pick the details that will appear in our dreams for us. And the other thing is that it's the source of theta waves from within the brain. These are very low frequency, 5 to 8 hertz waves that our brain produces when we're involved in things like meditation, trance, when we're under hypnosis, or when we're in twilight sleep. And the other thing that I want to mention, it has to do with the binding factor. As long as I've mentioned sleep here, the binding factor is not always present in the human brain. It's there when we're awake, when we're in fairly normal consciousness. It's there when we're dreaming, which is like normal consciousness insofar as dreaming an activity activates the same brain parts that are involved when you're actually in that activity. And that's kind of an amazing thing. This has led some researchers to wonder if perhaps the binding factor isn't also intimately related to our sense of self. When you're in a dream, you're there. When you're in your normal states of consciousness, again, you are there. But when you're in dreamless sleep, where are you? And this is a slightly mind-boggling concept. First you're there, then you're not, then you're there, then you're not, and you can watch it on an EEG. Dream sleep, present. Dreamless sleep, absent. There are 5 stages of it, and I won't bother you with all of them. But you appear, you disappear, you appear, you disappear. It happens every night to everybody, and yet we still allow ourselves such wide berth in making assumptions about who we are as individuals. So this is an actual example of the technology